it focuses on at least the beginning part, which is defined by Mishpatim. Mishpatim are civil laws, laws of torts, damages. It begins with the laws of slaves. And specifically the first set of halachas are talking about the Jewish slave. If a person purchases a Jewish slave, kisikna eved ivri sheish shanim yavod, he's only allowed to work for 6 years. Vashvi yetze lechov shichinam, and the 7th year he has to go out chinam, means with no charge. Cannot be a financial requirement for him to go free. Automatically goes free after 6 years. And it's interesting that although we don't have here all of the details, in Parshas Re'eh, it actually tells us that when a Jewish slave is set free, there's a requirement of hanakah. Hanakah is severance. You have to give him gifts, you have to give him money. There's a requirement you have to, it's hanek tanik oso. Interesting word. It doesn't say you have to give him, it says you have to, and hanakah, Rashi says like it means like a jewels or a necklace. That's what, but you have, there is a requirement, even though he's paid up. Usually there's a financial requirement why somebody becomes a slave. He owes money, he can't pay back. It's worked out. In addition to him having worked off what he owes, now you have to give like a bonus. You have to give him something. What's the idea? Why? In the laws of damages, it's also interesting is that we know there are different types of damages. Damages that affect somebody's property, which are dealt with your ox gore, somebody else's ox, things that are there's property damage, and there's also damage, bodily harm. The pasuk tells us that two men are fighting and they strike a pregnant woman and she miscarries, but there's no fatality, she doesn't die. They just have to make financial restitution for her loss of the fetus. And then the pasuk finishes with one of the more famous verses. In fact, this has been a source of major controversy. There is one of the proofs, quote unquote, that they bring as to the source of the Torah as opposed to not being divine is the Hammurabi Code. What's the Hammurabi Code? Hammurabi was a king. King Hammurabi had a code that he had a set of laws, and his laws follow almost word for word Mishpatim. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, foot for a foot. How's it possible that we only got the Torah at Har Sinai, and yet 1,000 years earlier, King Hammurabi is running around with a code that is mentioning things that are in the Torah? So there are different answers to that question. There's a couple of interesting answers to it. One of the answers they give is that Hammurabi, and the name even sounds that way, is Amraphel. Who was Amraphel? He was one of the good that lived in the vicinity of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was going around educating. He was teaching Torah. Now, how Avram Avinu knew Torah before the Torah actually was given, so we can discuss that too. But it's possible that the Hammurabi Code is really based on tenets that were taught to the people of that vicinity by Avram Avinu himself, even though this is where we're going to focus today. In Hammurabi's code, you took out someone's eye, they took out your eye. You cut off someone's hand, they cut off your hand. We know that even though the pasuk does say ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, yad tachas yad, right? It's not to be taken literally. The Torah Shebaal Peh tells us it means that you need to compensate financially for the value of the hand. So, however you're going to answer that question from Hammurabi, but the way they were doing it is not the way the halacha is. Because the halacha dictates that we don't make restitutions for having damaged someone physically by doing the same thing to that person. We don't do that. And the Talmud goes through a whole list of proofs that is correct, that that's not the right way to do it. And one of the arguments that are made is because no two human beings are the same physically or emotionally. And you need to restore the person. So, in fact, there's actually 5 different types of compensations that need to be made. We'll talk about that in a moment. But it's not possible. Somebody has a different type of vision than the person, either your vision is different than his vision, your strength is different than his strength, your size of the bodies are different. So it's impossible to be, if it's a quid pro quo that you have to do to him, to the perpetrator what he did to the victim, that's not possible. Aside from taking into account the emotional stress and the pain and the suffering, which no two people are alike. So to do the same thing back to that person would not be. Therefore, it cannot mean anything else than compensation. That's what the Talmud makes the argument. The obvious question is, well, if that's what it means, so then why did the Torah couch it as ayin tachas ayin, shein? It should say kesef tachas ayin, kesef tachas. Write it in what it means. Don't write it the way. It's misleading. In fact, it's so misleading. Hammurabi got it wrong. That's what they were doing. So, if in fact what it means is not what it says, then say what it means. It's just a very simple question, right? It means money. And again, that's not the argument. It's a good argument. It can't be what it's saying because there's no two people are alike. You wouldn't be able to make a quid pro quo. It wouldn't be exactly the same. So compensate. One last question. Maimonides, the Rambam, when he brings down the laws of damages, so he talks about damage of assets, of property, animal damage. It goes through all of them. When it gets to body injury, when it gets to the damage that's caused to a person, he adds a new component. In addition to fully compensating the person what needs to be compensated, which, by the way, the Gemara in Bava Kama tells us that there's 5 damages that need to be paid to compensate the person. You have to pay for nezek, that's the loss of value. The person has become devalued by the damage that was occurred. There's tsar, you have to pay for pain and suffering. Ripui, you have to pay for his medical costs. Sheves, loss of income, right? And boshes, there's certain cases where there's humiliation, for embarrassment. So these are 5 very sophisticated system that the Talmud said this is what's included in it. So Rama brings all of those things down, and he says, and even after you've paid for all of those 5 things, right? You have not been forgiven. There's one more thing that needs to be done. What has to be done? Forgiveness. You have to ask mechila. You have to ask forgiveness. You have to have appeasement. It's called pisui. You need to get appeasement from the person. You have to say sorry. It's fascinating. He doesn't bring it down by all the other damages. There's other damages. You damage someone's house, you damage his real estate, you damage his ox, all those things he doesn't bring down. He brings down what you have to do to compensate the person, and then you fulfill the obligation of compensation. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. You have to compensate the person, make him whole. When it comes to bodily injury, injuring, damaging the person, there the Rambam adds a component that you have to say sorry. It's interesting. What's the insight there? That's an interesting thing that he brings in. So right now we have 3 questions we're working on. Number 1, the laws are very detailed as to what you have to do with a slave. And they're very strict laws. In fact, it's not like, there's almost a sense when you go through these, you feel how archaic the laws are. You're learning about slaves and, we went, that's seems to be just, medieval. And, it's not, doesn't seem to be something that we can even relate to. But if you go through the halachas, by the way, in the sensitivities that are given to the slave, like if there's one pillow, he's supposed to get it, not you. I mean, there's the laws that you're supposed to be, it's a way that a person can reclaim his place in society, paying off his debt, paying off it. It's to allow a person, not to actually demean the person, but to allow him to get back to that he has his standing in society. That's really the idea of how it's supposed to work. But nevertheless, so you have those laws, and we find in Parsha Re'eh, on top of everything that you're supposed to do and how fairly you're supposed to treat him, then you have to give him a bonus. You have to do Hanukkah. Hanek Tanik also, you have to Hanek Tanik Lo, you have to give him, Rashi says it means like a necklace, like it means it's an expression. It says you have to give him severance. Hanukkah, I think in modern Hebrew too, right? What is severance in modern Hebrew? Ma'anak, right? That's severance. Today it becomes, it's one of the things that it's it's dealt with today in a lot of the day schools, that a teacher has been a certain amount of years in a school. Moshe Feinstein ruled, and many people that you can't just let the teacher go. You have to give them severance. There's a concept of severance. It comes from this idea of Hanukkah. You have to give a certain amount. It's a month a year, or 2 weeks a year. Different places have different standards. What's the idea? If he doesn't, why does he deserve it if he got what he was paid? What is it doing? We're trying to figure out if, in fact, as the pasuk says, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, yad tachas yad, is not literal, it's figurative, it means compensation, then say. Why are you couching it in as if it's yad tachas yad? Say money. You have to pay money for. I have to write it that way. And the last thing we're trying to understand is what is the Rambam's. First of all, why is the Rambam right? He only writes that you have to say sorry. You have to ask for pius, appeasement, when you damage someone physically. No other damage does require appeasement. And where's the Rambam getting from? One of the difficulties that people had with the Rambam, he never wrote sources. Right? The Rambam writes in his introduction is that after my book, you're going to need no other books. He writes that in his introduction. But people weren't too happy with that either. But he said, after my books, you're going to need no other books. Happens to be, other than the Bible, second to the Bible, the Rambam has more commentaries written on the Rambam than any other book other than the Bible. So there's more books written to explain the Rambam. He himself writes, you don't need any more books. But part of the problem was he never brought sources. Everything it's one of the most brilliant works that man has ever written, but he never wrote what his sources were, and so therefore the commentary is all. So where's this idea? What's the idea that you have to ask as part of compensation? The fact that you have to ask sorry, I understand. You have to ask sorry for somebody who did something to them, but he's bringing it down as part of the laws of compensation. You have to ask sorry, and he only brings it by physical damage. He doesn't bring it by any other damage. So what is he getting that for? What does he understand? How does he understand that? So I think the idea needs to be, and I think it opens up just a whole insight into just human psychology for ourselves as well. The Talmud's telling us that you can't be an eye for an eye, can't be literal. Why? Because it'll never be an exact retribution for the perpetrator, because everybody's physically, emotionally different, so therefore can't be an exact compensation. So therefore it can't be taken literally. That's what the Talmud says. But you see, though, the idea is, we're trying to, what the idea of compensation is to restore the person. The perpetrator, the victim, needs to be restored. But since so we can't restore him if it's not exact, there's going to be, on some end, one is going to be greater than the other, so therefore you have to restore him financially. So our question is, so then just write financially. So there is a concept, there's a prohibition in the Torah, you can't take nekama. What does nekama mean? Revenge. Revenge is actually, lo sikom ve lo titor. Lo sitor. There's two things you're not allowed to do. Rashi gives, it's interesting because we deal with this all the time, right? Rashi gives two examples. Nekama is you go to somebody and say, can I borrow your screwdriver? And he says no. A week later he comes to you, he says, can I borrow your hammer? So there's a prohibition in the Torah to say, no, I'm not going to give you the hammer because you didn't give me the screwdriver. That's nekama. Can't do that. That's a prohibition in the Torah. Lo sitar is actually very interesting. Lo sitar is, I'm going to give you the hammer, but just remember, I gave you the hammer even though you didn't give me the screwdriver. That's also a prohibition in the Torah. We do that all the time, right? Both are prohibited. You want to give him the hammer, give him the hammer. You don't want to give him, don't give him the hammer. But you cannot not give it to him and say because you didn't, and you cannot give it to him, I'm doing that, and even though you didn't do that, you can't do either. That's lo sikom, lo sitar. Both are prohibited. Right? It like cuts out of 50% of our day now. And what do we do with that 50%, right? It's like, it's such a difficult thing for a person to deal with. But the idea, though, nekama, there is places where you're allowed to have nekama. Because what does nekama come from, by the way? What is the shorish? Kam, makom. It's to replace, to give back the place that was lost. That's what revenge is. What is revenge? Something was taken away from me, or I lost something, and now I want to restore. I want to restore that. Right? So generally, again, in most cases, you can't do that. But certain places, the Talmud says that there is a place for nekama, restoration. In the case of damages, the idea is that there is a concept of restoring the victim. So what the Torah must be telling us, the truth of the matter is, if you've taken out somebody's eye, what really should happen in order to restore the victim, really what should be happening, there's only one way to really completely restore him. The perpetrator should lose his eye. Because how do you restore something? You can't give him back an eye. He's going to walk around the rest of his life, he's going to be walking around without an eye, and you're going to be walking around the rest of your life with an eye. So what should happen to restore the psyche, it's not just the physical loss and the financial loss, it's the emotional psyche of the person. The person who did it to him, why should he have an eye when you took out his eye? You should lose your eye. That's why the Torah couches it that way. To tell you that anything you're going to do, compensate the person, you have to get to as close as you can to restoring the victim. If you would have just said pay, fine, I'll pay. It's not idea just paying. It's restoring. Restoring that person in a way that the closest to it would have been you lose your eye. For whatever technicalities that can happen, now we understand anything that's going to be done to restore the victim has to be done as close. It's not just compensating, but it's making him whole. The only way to make him whole is not just a financial thing. It's emotional. His dignity. He's been broken more than just from the physical standpoint. As somebody does something to you physically, you have to restore the damaged psyche. That's what has to be addressed. Which is therefore the Rambam understands the fact that the Torah says it in the way that it does, eye for an eye, even though it's not, we're looking for complete restoration of the person. The Rambam says when someone does something to you physically, no matter how much money you give the person, there's only going to be one thing that can completely restore them. What do you have to do? The perpetrator has to do something else. What does he have to do? He has to ask sorry. Because getting the piyus, getting the appeasement, piyus means that he has to give you mechila, he has to forgive you. That's really, ultimately, then you've restored him. When he is able to forgive you, then you have, so you don't fulfill your obligation of restoring the person. So you damage his cow, you damage his property, that doesn't damage the psyche of the individual. You don't need a sorry for that. When you physically have been damaged, physically been abused, no money in the world is going to fix that. You need to see something from the perpetrator, a humbling, a contrition. There has to be something from that allows me to feel, to the extent that it's possible, to feel whole again. I'm going to walk around still without a hand or without an eye the rest of my life, but the bottom line is at least some emotional, psychological restoration has occurred. So we've answered up two questions. We've answered up why the Torah writes it that way, because it tells you really what you have to gain. It's not just pay him. You have to get restoration, right? And that's where the Rambam's source is that it really doesn't help unless there's been mechila. So I'll tell you an unbelievable idea that I heard from a Rosh Yeshiva. He asked an interesting question. Why is it, it's like human psychology here, why is it you go to the airport, right? If you do curbside check-in, right? The expectation is you need to tip the guy that's taking your suitcase. If you go inside, right, you don't tip the person there. Why? When do we tip and when do we not tip? What's the social norm? Right?
Service. When you get a good service, you have to tip.
But there's the guy at the front could be doing service for you too.
But you have to wait in line to get there.
So what's the logic there? What you're going through, the drawbridge, in the tolls. You don't tip the guy who's lifting the, So you go to a restaurant, the waiter. You tip the waiter. You don't tip the cook. Some places, I guess, they go in and tip, but it's not...
because they're serving you. They bring themselves down to you, no?
That's it. So the idea really is, the idea is we tip when someone has demeaned themselves, has done some physical service to you that is demeaning, so the tipping is to restore that person. That's the idea. The idea is someone has served you. When someone has served you, that's a demeaning thing. So in addition to the fact that he's getting compensated just pays him for his time. It doesn't restore him in terms of his emotional sense of being degraded, of being demeaned. How do you make him whole? You tip him. That's the idea behind the tip. I mean, we don't think about it because it's just coming, but that's the idea, right? You're tipping someone for having done something for you that is not the norm that a person does for another person. It's like could be sensed as being degrading, and I see now that on the Ubers, by the way, they give you the right. So I didn't honestly. I started using Uber. I didn't even know what that was I'm so out of. Somebody sending my. I didn't even bother looking at it. The guy last night, I'm coming from the airport, he says, why do you have a 4-star rating, not a 5-star rating? And I finally figured out, because you get rated on how much you tip. So therefore, they get rated on how their service is, but they're rating you on, he asked me, did you shoot an Uber driver? Because in order to get a 4, and I finally realized that I haven't been responding to this thing, and that's, so I finally started, but the point is, the idea of tipping is to restore the person. So then that's the shot over here. And by the way, we see that also. It's very interesting. It says Avram Avinu, when he went down to Egypt, it says there was a famine, hunger, starving. He stops in hotels. He goes to inns along the way. So the Talmud says, it's based on the reading of the Pasuk, that when he came back from Egypt, now he came back, he could stay at the Waldorf. He's like fabulously wealthy. It said he stayed at all of the hotels that he stayed going down, he stayed going up. What's the idea? Because he could afford a lot more. But the idea is they did personal service to him. The way he's showing them the appreciation for the personal service, that's the ultimate way of restoring someone. I love what you were doing for me. Even though I could go somewhere else, I'm still coming back over here. That's the idea of restoring. That's the idea. So the Talmud is telling us as well, and that's the Torah is telling us, is that when somebody has worked for you for 6 years, has been your slave, right, he needs to be restored. You paid him, yes, but he's going to go now knowing through life he was a slave. How does he overcome that? You give him a tip, you give him a bonus, you give him ha'anaka above and beyond what you owe. That shows the person, it wasn't just that you appreciated what he did for you. You're showing him above and beyond. That is to restore the person. That's the idea. And it's very nice because the word doesn't say you have to give it to him. It says you have to lahanik. Hanaka is a necklace. A necklace is something gives you dignity. You wear something around your neck to show you. You're trying to restore his dignity. That's what you're doing. You're trying to make him feel dignified again. You're trying to restore him. That's the idea. Very often we go through life, I paid him already for it. And it's not the idea of just giving the money. It's giving a person back his dignity. You've done something to him, give him back his dignity. So these two ideas are the same idea. Right? The idea of giving the Eved back is to show him back. The idea of you've damaged someone, you've hurt him. You've not only hurt his dignity, you've demeaned him. Give that back to him. Appeasement is necessary. You have to express, and that's that's a very important tool, by the way, by ourselves and even with our kids. You can teach a kid to say sorry. Sorry doesn't help if it's not done correctly. If a sorry is done correctly, it helps. Say sorry. The recipient didn't get anything out of that. If you have to ask for it, it's even worse. The idea is that you're doing it because this makes the person feel whole. It's a whole different way of understanding something. He needs you to move on by accepting what you've done to him and showing that you won't. This is not something you feel bad about doing. It's showing your contrition. That's what makes him feel whole. So how you say it is what restores the person. I think that's just a very important message that we're learning here, both in terms of the laws of damages, that it's part of the Rambam is saying it's part of the compensation. You owe him that sorry. But it has to be done in a way that restores his dignity, and that's the idea we see by the Eved as well, by the mitzvah of Hanukkah.